It is often said that this is the indigenous people's land or that their land is taken. This is a critical topic in conversations about reconciliation, so let's talk about this. Firstly, it is an undeniable fact that the indigenous people of Australia have inhabited this continent for thousands of years. Over 200 years ago, when the first European colonies were established, the majority of indigenous people lived a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. In contrast, the European settlers were coming from an agricultural and industrial society. The current culture and civilization that is now common among us are based on this agricultural and industrial worldview. There is a profound difference between how a hunter-gatherer society and an agricultural and industrial society view land and the environment. Considering that I belong to the latter, my understanding of the worldview of the Aboriginal people is limited, so I apologize if my explanation is incomplete or not precise enough. In an industrial worldview, land is seen as an object that can be farmed or mined for the mass production of food or goods. Land is considered a valuable asset for wealth production and can be bought or sold. While we may have emotional attachments to specific areas, such as the suburb or home where we grew up, these feelings do not grant us inherent rights or ownership. On the other hand, in a hunter-gatherer society, individuals are part of the environment. The land determines their sustenance, safety, and access to water. Therefore, they have a profound relationship with the environment, where the land may provide abundant resources one day and be less generous the next. Considering that this society has not tamed nature and to a large extent is controlled by the environment, they do not have the concept of land ownership but rather maintain a spiritual connection to the land. Just imagine, what is the value of a 1,000 square meter block in a hunter-gatherer society? Obviously, it is zero. The value of the land is due to the economic activities you can conduct on that land. This is why, upon the arrival of the first settlers, there were no major wars between the invaders and the indigenous people. The invaders mostly did not need to use military forces to take over the land. Thus, it is important to understand that when we refer to the land as belonging to Aboriginal people, we are acknowledging their spiritual and cultural connection to the land, not legal ownership in the European sense. This confusion arises when modern Western definitions and worldviews are imposed on other cultures. Therefore, besides some rare occasions where negotiations were conducted and the land was purchased from Aboriginal people via a treaty, such as the land where Melbourne is located today, the majority of the land was taken without using any brutal forces, simply because the two parties had different worldviews and that the Aboriginal people did not claim land ownership in the same way as the European settlers. In addition, the geopolitical environment, ethics, and international politics of the 18th century were very different from today. A country like Aboriginal Australia without appropriate defence forces could not have survived. If it was not colonised by the British, it would have been colonised by the French, Dutch, Portuguese, German, Japanese, or Chinese. If you could not defend your country, an invasion was inevitable. In fact, when we compare the colonisation process of Australia, we must admit that despite its brutality, it was far more humane than what occurred in the Americas or Africa. Fast forward to 21st century, where activists talk about land ownership, despite such claims historically not existing. However, let's consider some facts about present-day Australia. As of May 2021, Indigenous people have exclusive possession rights over 26% of Australia's landmass, which allows them to exclude others from the land. When non-exclusive native titles are included, Indigenous people own 54% of Australia's land. These numbers do not include individual lands that Aboriginal individuals may own. So we can clearly see that despite all the noise that we hear in the media, more than 54% of Australia is owned by 3% of its population. So is this still unfair? Some argue that most of these lands are in remote areas and do not have any value. However, it must be noted that many mining sites are located in these areas and many Indigenous organisations are driving significant revenues from mining activities. Additionally, the value of land in densely populated areas like Sydney or Melbourne is not intrinsic to the land itself, but is created by the economic activity of the settlers and immigrants. Imagine if all of the non-Indigenous population of Australia leave the country, what would be the value of land in Sydney or Melbourne? So the Indigenous Australians have lost 45% of the land, but in return, they are benefiting from social and health services, public housing, education, safety and security, and economic activity that the immigrants have provided to them. Available data shows that as of 2015 to 16, the Australian government has been spending $122 million per day on services to Aboriginal people. This means that the Australian taxpayers are paying every Aboriginal person, of any age or level of Aboriginal heritage, more than $1,100 per week for the land that they have lost. Is it still unfair?